The finest hour. The greatest moments of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. It is a quiet night, my dear one. The moon hangs low in the sky like a soft lantern, shining gently through the window, and the world outside has fallen into a tender silence. No loud sounds, no hurried footsteps, only the soft rustle of leaves and the steady rhythm of your own peaceful breath. The stars blink slowly, as if they too are growing sleepy. The air is cool and calm, wrapping around you like a blanket woven from stillness. Tonight, before you drift into dreams, I want to tell you a story of a man's finest hour. Not just one moment, but a constellation of courage, wisdom, and grace that lit up the world. This is the story of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the moments that made him immortal, the choices that spared humanity from darkness, and the ideals that still guide us today. Close your eyes, my darling. Let the gentle night carry us back to meet the man who turned fear into hope, and crisis into glory. Close your eyes, my darling, and let the gentle darkness carry us back. Back to a world shadowed by the Cold War, where the threat of nuclear fire hung over every home, where tension between superpowers thickened the air. It was a time when the sky itself seemed to hold its breath, when children practiced hiding under school desks, when maps of the world were divided by an iron curtain that was not made of iron but of fear. It was a time when leadership was not about fame, but about survival, about choosing. Courage over chaos, restraint over rage, and humanity over hostility. And into this world stepped a man whose finest hours were yet to come. But before we reach those shining moments, let us travel even further back, to the very beginning of his story, for every finest hour has its roots in quiet, unseen moments. Let us go to a house in Brookline, Massachusetts, on May 29, 1917, when a baby boy was born to Joseph and Rose Kennedy. They named him John Fitzgerald, after his grandfather, a man known for his charm and his poetry. From his first breath, this little boy was surrounded by a large, lively family. 8 brothers and sisters would follow, a house filled with laughter, with arguments, with games, with love. The Kennedy home was not a quiet one, but it was a home where striving was encouraged, where ideas were debated around the dinner table, where being smart was celebrated more than being strong. But little Jack, as they called him, was not the strongest. He was often sick. Oh, my darling, close your eyes a little tighter and picture a small boy with bright eyes and a tousled mop of hair, lying in bed while the sun streamed through the window. He could hear his brothers and sisters playing outside. Joe, the eldest and strongest, running and shouting. Rosemary, gentle and sweet. Kathleen, full of laughter. But Jack could not always join them. His body would grow feverish, achy. The doctors came and went with their cold stethoscopes and serious faces. They spoke of scarlet fever, of back trouble, of 100 small and large maladies that seemed to find him. He spent long weeks, sometimes months, in and out of hospitals, in and out of his bed at home. But this is not a sad part of the story, my sweet one. This is where the first seeds of his finest hour were planted. Because while his body rested, his mind soared. Jack read books. Oh, how he read! He devoured tales of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, stories of chivalry and honor. He read about explorers who crossed uncharted oceans, about presidents who stood firm in storms. He read history, poetry, adventure. His mother Rose would bring him stacks of new books from the library, her arms piled high, and he would greet them like old friends. The sickbed became his classroom. The small room became his universe. He learned something there, in those quiet, lonely hours, that would shape him forever. He learned that strength was not always in the body. It was in the heart and the mind. He learned to listen, because when you cannot run with the other children, you listen to the world around you. He learned empathy, because when you suffer, you recognize suffering in others. And he learned that a single human being, armed with knowledge and courage, could change the course of history. Remember this, my darling. Sometimes the quietest moments prepare us for the loudest triumphs. Your stillness is not weakness. It is the gathering of wings. Freedom is a gift, my darling. A gift we earn by giving it to others. As Jack grew, he carried these lessons with him. He went to school, and though he was often ill, his wit shone brightly. He was not the best athlete, not the most punctual, not the neatest. His room was famously messy, papers scattered like leaves, books open on every surface, but he had a spark. He could make people laugh. He could win an argument with a clever turn of phrase. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, people leaned in. He was voted most likely to succeed by his classmates, not because he was the strongest, but because he was the most human. Then came the war. World War II, the great conflict that drew lines across the globe. Jack joined the Navy, despite his fragile health. He could have stayed safe, my love, using his father's influence, using the medical reports that listed his many ailments. But he would not. He remembered the nights from his books. He remembered the presidents who risked everything. He chose to serve. He became the commander of a small boat, a PT boat, number 109, patrolling the dark waters of the Pacific. The sea was ink black at night, the stars hidden by clouds, the only sound the low hum of the engine and the lapping of waves. On a moonless night in August 1943, his boat was sliced in two by a Japanese destroyer. The impact was sudden and terrible. A scream of metal, a wall of fire, the boat splitting like a broken toy, men thrown into the burning sea. 2 of his crew were killed instantly. 11 others, some badly burned, some stunned, clung to the wreckage. In that moment of chaos, Jack Kennedy became a leader. It was not a moment of speeches or cameras. It was a moment of pure, raw choice, panic or action. He chose action. He gathered the survivors. He pulled a badly burned crewmate, Patrick McMahon, onto a floating piece of wreckage, gripping the man's life vest strap in his teeth and swimming for 5 hours through the current, his own back screaming with pain. He led the men to a tiny, uninhabited island, barely a speck of sand and palm. 4 days, they survived on coconuts, on rainwater, on hope. Jack scratched a message on a coconut husk, and a native islander carried it through dangerous waters to the Allies. On the 8th day, rescue came. Every man he had brought to that island survived. His crew said later that he saved their lives not just by his actions, but by his spirit, by the calm in his voice, the certainty that they would make it. That, my darling, was a quiet kind of finest hour. When no one was watching, when there was no glory to be had, he chose to be brave for others. Hold that thought close. Courage is not a roar. It is the steady voice in the dark that says, "Hold on. We will find the way." Freedom is a gift, my darling. A gift we earn by giving it to others. After the war, Jack came home a hero, but he did not rest. He turned his gaze to public service. He wrote a book called Profiles in Courage, honoring senators who had stood for what was right even when it cost them everything. In his writing, he celebrated men who defied their parties, their friends, their own ambitions, simply because their conscience demanded it. The book won the Pulitzer Prize, but more importantly, it revealed the compass of his own heart. He believed that the hardest act in politics was not winning, but staying true to principle. That belief would guide him through every trial to come. Now, my sweet one, let us return to the moment we first glimpsed, the snow-covered day that would herald a new era. January 20th, 1961. Washington, D.C., wrapped in a glittering blanket of white. The sky was a pale silver gray, and the wind cut like tiny crystals across the faces of the crowd. They had come from every corner of the nation, by train, by automobile, some having walked miles in the cold, thousands upon thousands, bundled in thick coats and woolen scarves, their breath puffing out in little clouds that rose like prayers into the freezing air. The Capitol building rose behind the platform, its dome a silent witness to history. At precisely noon, a tall, slender figure stepped forward. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, 43 years old, the youngest elected president in American history, the first Catholic to hold the office. He wore no overcoat, no hat. The cold seemed to bounce off him, repelled by some inner fire. He stood tall and unflinching, his gaze sweeping over the sea of faces, seeing not just a crowd but a congregation of hope. Beside him sat the venerable former President Dwight Eisenhower, a general of great wars, the aged poet Robert Frost, who would attempt to read a poem and find the sun too bright on the snow, then instead recite from memory, and his wife Jacqueline, her hands folded, her eyes reflecting the gray sky. It was a moment suspended in time, a photograph before the shutter click, and then he spoke. His voice, with its distinctive Boston accent, rang out clear and warm, cutting through the cold. My dear, listen closely to the words he spoke that day, words that became the anthem of a generation. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And to the world beyond, he added, my fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man. This, my darling, was his first great shining moment as president. In a single speech, he lifted a nation's heart. He turned apathy into purpose, fear into resolve. He did not promise easy comfort or quick victories. He promised sacrifice, service, and shared dignity. The crowd cheered, not with wild excitement, but with a quiet, profound pride, a sound like a deep, sustained exhale of relief. For the first time in years, a leader spoke to their best selves, not their worst fears. The old divisions of party and region seemed, for that one bright hour, to dissolve. People looked at one another, strangers in the cold, and felt a sudden kinship. An inauguration, after all, is not just about one person taking office. It is about a whole people taking up a new purpose. And that day, the people did. His words traveled across the globe. In small villages in Africa and Asia, emerging from the shadows of colonialism. People listened on crackling radios and whispered the words to each other. In European cities still rebuilding from war, they heard a call to shared effort. The speech was translated into dozens of languages, but its meaning was universal. We are in this together. We are responsible for each other. Remember this, my sweet one. True glory is not in power itself, but in how we use it to lift others up. Power without love is like a lamp without oil. Darkness soon follows. Power guided by service is a sunrise. He stood that day with the weight of a nation upon him, yet he did not flinch. His voice was steady, his gaze clear, his spirit unbroken. Men and women who had lived through war, through depression, through fear looked at this young president and felt something they had not felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that the future could be better. Hope that service could replace selfishness. Hope that unity could replace division. An elderly man in the crowd, who had marched in the Civil War as a boy, wept quietly, saying later that he never thought he would see America so young and so alive again. A young black student, facing discrimination at every turn, felt a spark of possibility that one day he too might be judged not by the color of his skin but by the content of his character, a phrase Kennedy would use often. Around him, his family stood proud. His mother, Rose, watched with tears in her eyes, remembering the little boy who had been so sick he could barely leave his bed. His father, Joseph, stood tall, knowing that his son had become more than a winner, he had become a leader. His brothers and sisters smiled, knowing that the boy who had read books in his lonely bedroom now spoke for the whole world. And his wife, Jacqueline, stood beside him, elegant and calm, her hand in his, knowing that this was only the beginning of a journey that would touch every corner of the earth. In that moment, the past and the future met. The sick little boy became the president of hope. The quiet reader became the voice of a generation. The boy who had been left out became the leader who included everyone. That is the magic of a finest hour. It turns what was broken into what is beautiful. Freedom is a gift, my darling. A gift we earn by giving it to others. Now, my sweet one, let us journey from that cold January day to the warm, hopeful spring of the same year, for another finest hour was already taking shape. Kennedy believed that service to others was the highest calling, and he wanted to give young Americans a way to serve the world not with weapons, but with skills and compassion. He imagined a corps of volunteers who would go into the farthest corners of the earth, not to fight, but to teach, to build, to heal. On March 1st, 1961, just weeks into his presidency, he signed the executive order establishing the Peace Corps. Close your eyes and picture it. A young woman from a small town in Iowa, hardly older than a girl, stepping off a plane in Ghana, her heart pounding with uncertainty. She has never been so far from home. The air is thick and unfamiliar, the sky a deeper blue. She carries a suitcase and a heart full of hope. She will spend 2 years teaching children to read, to write, to dream. A young man from California travels to a village in the Philippines, where he works alongside farmers to bring clean water to their fields. He eats food he's never tasted, learns words in a language he'd never heard, and discovers that a smile is the same in every tongue. These volunteers became known as the Peace Corps, and they carried Kennedy's vision in their hands. They did not seek glory or riches. They sought to share a little light. And as they gave, they received friendship, understanding, the profound knowledge that beneath every difference of culture and language, we are all one family. Kennedy met these volunteers before they left. He shook their hands, looked them in the eye, and told them, "The work you do will not make you famous. It will not make you rich. But it will make you a part of something far greater than yourself." He knew that the finest hours are not always grand gestures. They are often small, repeated acts of love. The Peace Corps still exists today, my darling, still sending out young men and women who carry that flame. And it all began with one man who believed that the measure of a nation was not its wealth or its weapons, but its willingness to serve. Remember this. You need not be president to serve. A kind word, a helping hand, a moment of patience. These are your Peace Corps, your gift to the world. Freedom is a gift, my darling. A gift we earn by giving it to others. But his most glorious hour, the moment that defined his legacy and saved the world, was yet to come. Let us travel forward to October 1962. 13 days that held the fate of humanity in the balance. 13 days when every choice could mean peace or nuclear catastrophe. This is the story of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the finest hour of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Close your eyes tighter, my dear. Picture the calm before the storm. The White House, quiet but tense. A low hum of fluorescent lights in the corridors. The Oval Office, where maps and grainy black and white photographs cover the polished mahogany desk. A U-2 spy plane has returned from high above Cuba, its cameras capturing images that freeze the blood. Soviet nuclear missiles, positioned among palm trees and fields, hidden in bunkers, just 90 miles from Florida's warm shores. Missiles capable of reaching Washington, New York, Chicago, and every major American city in minutes. Missiles that could, in an afternoon, turn the bustling streets of the world into silent, smoking ruins. Millions of lives held in those steel and warhead casings. The world holds its breath. In offices and schools, people whisper the word Cuba. In Moscow, the Kremlin watches. In London, Paris, Delhi, Tokyo, the news spreads like a cold shadow gripping the heart. The whole earth becomes a single neighborhood waiting to see if it will burn. President Kennedy gathers his most trusted advisors in the cabinet room. They are a group that will become known as ExComm, the Executive Committee of the National Security Council. Their faces are drawn, their voices clipped. They spread the photographs across the table, pointing with trembling fingers. Some shout for war. The Joint Chiefs of Staff, hardened men who had fought in the jungles of the Pacific and on the beaches of Normandy, urge immediate airstrikes to obliterate the missile sites. They demand an invasion of Cuba, a full-scale military operation to topple Fidel Castro. They warn that hesitation will make America look weak, that the Soviets will sense fear and push further, that the only language these communists understand is force. The pressure is overwhelming. Every instinct of nation, of pride, of political survival cries out for bold, violent action. The room grows hot with argument. Voices rise. The clock on the wall ticks louder than any voice, but Kennedy does not rush. He does not shout. He listens. He sits back in his wooden rocking chair, a chair he keeps because of his painful back, a chair that allows him to think, and he rocks slowly, back, and fourth, a gentle, steady rhythm amid the storm. He asks questions. What are the consequences of an airstrike? What if we miss one missile? What if the Soviets retaliate in Berlin? What if the world spins into nuclear war because we refuse to pause? His coolness confuses some of the generals. They want action. They want certitude. But Kennedy, my darling, knows that the finest hour is not about reacting with heat. It is about responding with light. He remembers his own past, the long nights sick in bed, the days he watched others play through the window. He remembers what it means to be vulnerable, to be at the mercy of forces you cannot control. He remembers the war, the screams of sailors burning on the water, the sight of his brother Joe's plane exploding over the English Channel, bodies never found, a family shattered by grief. He knows that war is not glory. War is loss. War is mothers crying for sons, children waking to empty homes, cities reduced to rubble, the future stolen before it is born. He has read the histories of great conflicts, and he knows that no one ever truly wins a nuclear war. There are only survivors picking through ashes. If anyone survives at all, so he chooses a different path. A path of steady nerve, quiet resolve, and quiet wisdom. He does not attack. Instead, he orders a naval quarantine, a word carefully chosen because a blockade is an act of war, but a quarantine is a shield. Ships sail from naval bases, their wakes white and sharp under the sun, to form a ring around Cuba. Destroyers and aircraft carriers, sailors in peacoats staring at a horizon that could erupt at any moment. Their mission: stop any Soviet vessel that might be carrying more weapons, but do so with restraint, without firing the first shot. Kennedy knows that the first shot could be the last shot humanity ever hears. On October 22, 1962, he sits at his desk in the Oval Office, the cameras rolling, the nation hushed. The red light blinks on. He speaks to the people on television and radio, his voice calm, clear, unshakable, its New England cadences like steady waves on a shore. He tells the American people the truth, the unvarnished, terrifying truth. He shows them the photographs, maps of the missile sites. He acknowledges their fear, but he does not stoke it. He tells the Soviet Union the cost of aggression, not with bluster, but with a quiet, absolute certainty. It shall be the policy of this nation, he says, his eyes looking directly into the lens, directly into millions of living rooms, to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response. These words are not threats. They are promises. Promises to protect his people, but also to leave room for peace. There is, in his voice, no anger, only resolve. The resolve of a man who has looked into the abyss and decided that the world will not fall in on his watch. That night, my darling, people could not sleep. In cities and farmhouses, families gathered around their television sets, their radios, their kitchen tables. Some prayed. Some wept. Some wrote letters to loved ones, just in case. Mothers held their children a little tighter, breathing in the scent of their hair, memorizing the feel of their small hands. Children, sensing the tension, asked questions their parents could not answer. Would there be a war? Would the sky light up? In schools the next day, the drills were different. Instead of fire drills, there were air raid drills. Children crouched under desks, hands over their heads, a futile gesture against nuclear fire, but a ritual that made them feel they were doing something. The world felt brittle, like a glass ornament dangling over a stone floor. For 13 days, the world teetered on the edge of destruction. The naval quarantine went into effect. Soviet ships steamed toward the line. The two superpowers, like two massive animals, circled each other, teeth bared. Every hour brought a new rumor, a new report. A U-2 plane was shot down over Cuba, the pilot killed, the first blood of the crisis. Voices in the room screamed for revenge. And still, Kennedy stayed steady. He had received 2 letters from the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, one harsh and demanding, the other softer, more personal, almost pleading. The hard one he ignored. The soft one he answered. His advisors called it the trollop ploy, responding to the message you wish you had received, hoping the other side would seize the olive branch. It was a gamble, but it was a gamble for peace. He works late into the night, the lights of the Oval Office burning until the small hours. He skips meals, or eats a sandwich so absently that he cannot later recall if he ate at all. He rests only for short moments, his mind always on the safety of the world. His brother Robert, the Attorney General, is his closest confidant, a steady voice at his side. They talk in whispers, walk the rose garden under the cold autumn sky, their breath misting like the hopes of billions. Jacqueline stays by his side, bringing him tea, touching his shoulder, reminding him that he is not alone. Sometimes she makes him sit down and close his eyes for 5 minutes, guarding those 5 minutes like a holy thing. His children, Caroline and little John Jr., are tucked safely in bed upstairs, unaware that their father is holding the world in his hands. He goes up, late at night, and stands in their doorway, watching them sleep. Their chests rise and fall in a rhythm older than nations. He thinks of all the children, in every land, who deserve to wake to sunlight, not fire. That silent vigil in the nursery door, that too is a finest hour. The leader who can still be a father, the warrior who can still be tender, the man who carries the weight of the world but still finds time to tuck in his little ones with a quiet kiss on the forehead, sometimes, in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn. He walks alone along the White House lawn, the grass silver with frost, the Secret Service agent shadows at a distance. He looks up at the stars, the same stars that look down on Moscow, on Havana, on every village and city of the world. He thinks of all the children sleeping under those stars. He thinks of the boys and girls who should never know the horror of war. He thinks of the future they deserve, a future of learning, of love, of long lives. And in those moments, his choice becomes clear: peace at any cost, but peace with honor. On October 27th, the darkest day, Black Saturday, they call it, a Soviet submarine near the quarantine line, B-59, is depth-charged by American destroyers practicing signaling. The submarine's crew, cut off from communications, sweltering in the heat of a malfunctioning air conditioner, believe war has started. The captain decides to launch a nuclear torpedo. The political officer agrees. All that is required is the consent of a third man, Vasily Arkhipov, the brigade chief of staff. And that man, my darling, in a moment of agony, refuses. He refuses to give the order. Placed by fate in that steel tube under the sea, he chooses life over annihilation. Kennedy will never know his name, will never meet him, but Arkapov's refusal is the hidden companion to Kennedy's own restraint. It takes two to make a war, but it takes two to make a peace. The universe balances on such fragile, brave choices, and then, on the morning of October 28, 1962, a message crackles over the radio from Moscow. The Soviet Union will remove the missiles from Cuba. The crisis ends. And it ends not with a bang, but with a quiet transmission. Kennedy listens in the Oval Office, the room silent except for the static and the voice of the interpreter. He sits very still. Then he looks up at his brother, and a long, slow breath escapes him. A breath he has been holding for 13 days. Outside, the sun rises, golden and gentle, over the White House lawn. The world, miraculously, is still there. No bombs fall. No cities burn. No lives are lost to war. The bells of the Washington National Cathedral begin to ring, and across the country, people fall to their knees, or embrace strangers in the street, or simply stand still, letting the tears come. Mothers hug their children and whisper, "It's over. We are safe." In London, Prime Minister Harold Macmillan calls Kennedy the great peacemaker. But Kennedy takes no bows. He orders that there be no gloating, no boasting. He issues a statement of quiet gratitude, honoring Khrushchev's statesmanship. He knows that the peace was fragile, and that it required the adversary to also be wise. Humility, even in victory, is a hallmark of the finest hour. This, my darling, is his greatest glory. He did not win a battle. He won peace. He did not roar like a conqueror. He acted like a father, protecting his family, sparing children from fear, preserving the world for future generations. Every nuclear weapon dismantled. Every missile crate shipped back to the Soviet Union was a child's laugh preserved, a sunset untouched by flame. The glory of that hour is not in the size of the accomplishment, though it is the largest any leader can claim, but in the quiet, unshakable goodness at its heart. In every home that night, parents kissed their children good night and thanked whatever they believed in for a leader who chose wisdom over war. In every country, people looked to America and saw not a warrior, but a guardian. That is the finest kind of glory, the glory that saves lives, the glory that protects the innocent, the glory that chooses life over death. Freedom is a gift, my darling. The greatest freedom of all is the freedom to live without fear. Now, let us turn to another shining moment, one that required not diplomatic cables and naval lines, but a fierce moral courage that would shake a nation and redeem its promise. It is the fight for civil rights, the long struggle to ensure that every American, regardless of the color of their skin, would be treated with equal dignity and justice. Long before it was popular, Kennedy chose to stand with those who had been left behind. He watched, on television screens that were slowly entering every living room, as brave young black students walked through screaming mobs to attend school. He saw the images from Birmingham, Alabama, where fire hoses and police dogs were turned on peaceful protesters, the water blasting bodies to the pavement, the dogs tearing at their clothes. He saw children, like Ruby Bridges, a small black girl in a white dress, walking with federal marshals through an angry, spitting crowd, just to enter a school and learn her letters. She was so small, my darling, and the crowd so big and so cruel, yet she walked with her head high, a satchel of books in her hand, the embodiment of innocent courage. Kennedy looked at that image, his jaw tight, and he saw the soul of America being torn apart. He remembered what it felt like to be excluded, to be different, to watch from the outside. He remembered the loneliness of the sick room. But he also knew that his childhood loneliness was a shadow compared to the systemic exclusion faced by millions of his fellow citizens. He had grown up in privilege, yes, but he had also grown up with a mother who taught him that every human being was a child of God, and that the measure of a person was their heart, not their color or their wealth. His faith, his reading, his own experience of suffering, all of it converged in a quiet but absolute conviction. Segregation was a moral wrong, and it must end, and so he acted. Slowly at first, some critics said, but with building force. He called the governors of resistant states. He sent federal marshals to protect the Freedom Riders, those courageous activists who rode buses into the South to challenge segregated bus terminals, risking beatings and firebombs. He addressed the nation with a gravity that made even his political opponents fall silent. On June 11, 1963, an evening long after the summer sun had begun to set, he sat at his desk in the White House, the cameras rolling live on all three networks. He spoke without notes, his gaze direct, his voice trembling with conviction. He said something that few leaders dared to say so plainly, something that cut to the very heart of the American promise. We are confronted primarily with a moral issue. It is as old as the scriptures and is as clear as the American Constitution. And then he spoke words that ring like a bell through the ages, words that every child should learn, words that every heart should hold. The rights of every man are diminished when the rights of one man are threatened. He announced he would send to Congress the Civil Rights Act, a law that would end segregation in public places, open schools to all, protect the right to vote, and ensure that every person is treated equally under the law, no matter the color of their skin. That law would be the most sweeping civil rights legislation since Reconstruction, almost a century before. And he knew the cost. He knew many would hate him for it. The phones in the White House switchboard lit up with calls, some weeping with gratitude, others spitting curses. He knew it would cost him political support in the South, that it might even cost him re-election. But he did not care. He cared about justice. He cared about children growing up knowing they are worthy, they are loved, they are equal. He cared about the little black girl who should never have to walk through a gauntlet of hatred just to learn to read. He cared about the young black man who should never have to show a poll tax receipt just to cast a vote. He cared, my darling, about the promise written in the Declaration of Independence, that all are created equal, a promise that had been broken so often it seemed a lie. He would make it true. When he finished speaking, he looked down at his notes, his shoulders perhaps a little heavier, but his spirit alight. He had spoken from the depths of his soul. In homes across America, black families gathered around radios and television sets, and they wept. Not tears of sorrow alone, but tears of recognition. For the first time, a president spoke for them, not just as a political necessity, but as a moral imperative. For the first time, a president saw them, saw the dignity in their struggle, saw the love in their homes, saw the aching desire to be simply American, nothing more and nothing less. For the first time, a president fought for them with the full force of his office, calling segregation a moral crisis that could not be met with repressive police action or silent indifference. That is glory, my darling, seeing the invisible, hearing the silent, lifting the fallen. It is the glory of a leader who did not merely govern, but inspired. And his words that night became law the following year, signed by his successor Lyndon Johnson, but indelibly stamped with Kennedy's vision and sacrifice. That very night, hours after Kennedy's speech, a man named Medgar Evers, a civil rights leader in Mississippi, was assassinated in his own driveway, shot in the back. His children were inside, his wife waiting up for him. The news reached the White House, and Kennedy, who had spoken of justice, was now confronted with its price. He invited Medgar Evers's widow and children to the White House, sitting with them in the Oval Office, his own children playing nearby, his voice gentle and full of sorrow. He did not look away from the pain. He shared it. That, too, is a finest hour, the capacity to mourn with those who mourn, to sit with suffering and not flinch, to let grief become a goad to further action. Freedom is a gift, my darling. A gift that is only real when everyone shares it. Now let us walk with him to another bright moment, a moment that seemed to distill all his ideals into a single place, a single speech, a single sentence that would ring across the Cold War divide. Berlin, June 1963. A city divided by a wall of grey concrete topped with barbed wire, a wall that snaked through neighborhoods, slicing streets in half, separating families from one another, trapping people in a system that denied them basic freedoms. For nearly 2 years, since August 1961, the wall had stood as a scar across the heart of Europe. On one side, a free, democratic city, rebuilding from the rubble of war with American aid. On the other, an armed camp of ideological control. Kennedy's motorcade winds through the streets of West Berlin, and the crowd that greets him is beyond anything he has seen. Over 1 million people, perhaps 2/3 of the city's population, line the boulevards, hanging from windows, perched on roofs, children hoisted on shoulders, elderly men and women who remember the war standing with tears in their eyes. They throw flowers, they wave handkerchiefs, they sing. It is a sea of humanity, a roaring river of hope. The car moves so slowly through the press of joyful bodies that the Secret Service agents grow nervous, but Kennedy is calm, smiling, waving, absorbing the energy. He climbs to a platform erected before the wall, at a place called Rudolf Wild Platz, near the Brandenburg Gate. To his left, the grim, grey barrier, with its guard towers and its death strip of raked sand where footprints would betray an escapee. He looks out at the crowd, at the wall, at the faces of people who long to be free, who live every day in the shadow of the unfree half of their own city, who can see a street where a father once walked his son to school and know they can never cross it again. He pauses for a long moment, letting the cheers wash over him like a tide. Then he begins to speak, his voice amplified by loudspeakers, echoing off the buildings. He starts by praising their endurance, their defiance of oppression through sheer spirit. And then, after many paragraphs, he arrives at the heart of the matter. He declares that the proudest boast anyone can make is to say, "Ich bin ein Berliner. I am a Berliner." In that moment, he does not stand as an American president, separate and distant. He stands as a fellow human being, a fellow citizen of the free city of the heart. His accent is imperfect, the phrase grammatically debated, but the meaning is unmistakable. He tells the people of Berlin, "You are not alone. Your struggle is my struggle. Your dream is my dream. Your wall is my wall. Your hope of freedom is the hope of all mankind." The crowd erupts. The roar is not just loud. It is soul deep, a cry from the very gut of a people. Tears stream down faces unchecked. Men who had survived the Gestapo, women who had carried rubble from bombed-out buildings, young people who had grown up knowing nothing but the wall. All of them weep and cheer and shout until their throats are raw. The sound carries across the wall into East Berlin, where secret listeners press their ears to hidden radios, where small groups huddle in kitchens and hear the words and dare to hope. For the first time in years, they feel seen. They feel valued. They feel that the free world has not forgotten them. A mother holds her child closer, pointing at the distant figure on the platform, and whispers, "He came for us." A grandfather wipes his eyes with a rough handkerchief, thinking of the son he lost during the war, thinking that his grandchildren might yet see a world without walls. A young boy looks up at the sky and thinks, "Someday, the wall will fall. Someday, we will be free." And years later, in 1989, when the wall does fall, when chisels and hammers and bare hands tear down that concrete symbol of division, people will remember that day. They will remember the president who crossed an ocean to say, "I stand with you." They will play the tape of his speech and cry all over again. This is glory. Glory in solidarity, glory in seeing the stranger as a brother, glory in saying to the oppressed, "Your burden is my burden, and together we will lift it." Freedom is a gift, my darling. A gift that grows stronger when we stand together. Now, my sweet one, let us turn our eyes upward, toward the stars. Kennedy lived in an age when the heavens were becoming a new arena of human endeavor, but also of Cold War competition. The Soviet Union had launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite, in 1957, a tiny beeping sphere that orbited the Earth and sent a shiver of fear through the West. They had sent the first human, Yuri Gagarin, into orbit in 1961, his voice crackling back from the void. America seemed to be losing the race to the stars. But Kennedy saw beyond the race. He saw a frontier not for conflict, but for discovery, for unity, for the boundless expansion of the human spirit. On May 25, 1961, just months into his presidency, he stood before a joint session of Congress and made a bold, breathtaking promise. The chamber was packed, the nation weary from the recent failed Bay of Pigs invasion. Of Cuba, needing a new vision. And so he gave it. "I believe this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth." The words hung in the air like a challenge thrown down before history. At that moment, America had not yet even put a man into orbit. The total experience of human spaceflight was measured in minutes. No spacecraft capable of landing on the moon existed. The math was unproven. The materials untested. The cost would be enormous, billions of dollars, an entire industry of science and engineering. Critics called it impossible. They called it a waste, a stunt, a distraction from problems on Earth, but Kennedy did not waver. He saw that the moon was not just a rock. It was a mirror reflecting our potential. He knew that reaching for the stars lifts us all, not just the astronauts who would go, but the schoolchildren who would watch, the scientists who would invent, the poets who would write. He knew that exploration teaches us courage, teaches us that the impossible is merely the untried. He knew that when we aim high, we become better. And he also knew, with a deep and quiet wisdom, that a shared goal might unite a fractured world. He even proposed, in a speech to the United Nations, that the journey to the moon be a joint endeavor between the United States and the Soviet Union. That idea startled the world, the two enemies clasping hands on the lunar surface. It did not come to pass in his lifetime, but the seed of cooperation was planted, a seed that decades later would bloom into the International Space Station, where Americans and Russians and many others work side by side. Kennedy brought his energy, his faith, his leadership to the space program. He traveled to Cape Canaveral, to the Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama, to Houston. He stood in the giant hangars, looking up at the nascent rockets, the Mercury capsules so tiny they seemed like tin cans. He met with the astronauts, those gallant test pilots with the right stuff, and he joked with them, but his eyes were serious. He knew they were taking risks he could scarcely imagine. He told a crowd at Rice University in Houston, on a hot September day in 1962, why we choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. The crowd roared. The words caught fire. They still burn today. That speech, my darling, was a finest hour of vision. Vision that does not settle for the low branches but stretches for the top of the tree, where the sunlight waits, and though he did not live to see it, his dream came true. On July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon, his suit white against the gray dust, and uttered words Kennedy would have loved. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. The whole world watched, over 500 million people, huddled around televisions in every land, from Manhattan skyscrapers to African mud huts with tinny sets. For one night, the earth was one family, looking up. And that step, my darling, began with Kennedy's courage to dream. When you dream, even when things seem impossible, you are standing on the shoulders of that vision. Your hopes, your aspirations, are not trivial. They are the same stardust that once propelled humanity to the moon. Freedom is a gift, my darling. The freedom to dream, to explore, to reach for the stars. Let us also speak of another, quieter kind of glory, the glory of championing beauty and intellect. Kennedy and Jacqueline believed that the White House should be not just a seat of power, but a temple of American art, culture, and thought. They invited poets like Robert Frost, musicians like Pablo Casals, to perform. The great Spanish cellist, an exile from fascism, played in the East Room while the candlelight flickered, his bow drawing a song of freedom and longing. The administration celebrated writers, scientists, Nobel laureates. Kennedy once said at a dinner for such luminaries that it was the most extraordinary collection of talent, of human knowledge, that has ever been gathered together at the White House, with the possible exception of when Thomas Jefferson dined alone. He could laugh at himself, 2. He prized wit and intelligence, and he knew that a nation's soul is measured not only in its gross national product, but in its poetry, its music, its capacity for wonder. This too is a finest hour. The affirmation that civilization matters, that the arts are not a luxury but a necessity, that a nation that funds a space program but neglects its poets is a nation headed for the stars with a hollow heart. Now let us enter the quiet glory of his family life, the private moments that made his public service possible. These, too, are part of his finest hour. For a man is not measured only by what he does for the world, but by how he loves the people closest to him. And Kennedy, for all his demands and flaws, loved deeply. He is a loving husband to Jacqueline, a woman of grace, intelligence, and quiet strength. Her voice was soft, her smile a gentle curve, her courage immense. She stood beside him in every storm, her hand often finding his in unguarded moments. She endured the loss of a newborn son, Patrick, in August 1963, and her grief was as deep as any ocean. Kennedy wept with her, held her, and in that sorrow they grew closer. She calms his tired spirit with her presence. With the careful way she restores the White House and makes it a home, not just an office. She brings beauty into his life, fresh flowers, paintings, music. When he is worn down by the weight of the world, she reads to him in the evening, poetry mostly, her voice a lullaby. When he doubts himself, she reminds him of his purpose, telling him that the people believe in him because he believes in them. When he misses the quiet life, she takes him to their farm in Virginia, to the green hills and their horses, where the noise of politics fades and only love remains. Their love is not loud or flashy, not the stuff of operatic romance. It is quiet, steady, deep, the kind of love that holds a man up when the world pushes him down, the kind of partnership that makes the unbearable bearable. And he is a tender father to Caroline and little John Jr., who the world affectionately called John John. When he comes home at the end of a day filled with crisis and calculation, he leaves the weight of the world at the door. The presidency melts away in the hall. He becomes simply Daddy. He kneels on the floor to play with his children, his bad back protesting, but he ignores it because their laughter is the best medicine. He reads them bedtime stories, the same tales of adventure and chivalry he once devoured in his sickbed. He carries them on his shoulders through the White House halls, their small hands clutching his hair, their giggles echoing off the historic walls. He tickles them, makes silly faces. He listens to their childish stories with total attention, as if nothing else in the world matters. He knows what it means to be a sick little boy, confined and lonely, and so he gives his children something he once missed: constant, warm, unshakable presence. He takes them to the Oval Office in the morning, and they hide under his massive desk while he tries to work, popping out to surprise him, and he feigns astonishment every single time. On weekends, they escape to Cape Cod, to their family compound in Hyannisport. The salt air, the cry of gulls, the rhythm of the waves, these are the sounds of his own childhood, and he wants his children to know them too. They walk along the beach at sunset, the sky painted in shades of lavender and rose. They collect seashells, comparing their treasures, tiny hands holding out speckled wonders. They build sandcastles that the tide will wash away, learning the gentle lesson of impermanence and the joy of making anyway. The President of the United States becomes just a father, running, laughing, loving, present. He chases his children along the shore, his feet splashing in the cold Atlantic. He lets them bury his feet in the sand. He sits on the porch with Caroline on his lap, pointing at the sailboats on the horizon, telling her stories of the sea, of heroes, of dreams. He teaches them to love nature, to love books, to love each other, to be kind because kindness is the greatest strength. He teaches them that everyone is worthy of respect, from the gardener to the Prime Minister. These quiet moments are not in history books. They do not make headlines, but they are the foundation of his glory. Because a man who can love his family deeply is a man who can love his nation deeply. A man who protects his own children will protect all children. A man who kneels to play with a toddler will not easily send other toddlers' fathers to die. The tenderness of the hearth is the seed of justice in the square. Remember this, my sweet. 1. The greatest leaders are first great human beings. Their public courage is rooted in private love. Freedom is a gift, my darling. A gift rooted in love. Now, my dear one, we must walk softly into the shadows that fall at the end of every story. For John Fitzgerald Kennedy's light, so bright, was not destined to burn long. The finest hours we have described were not the entirety of his life, but they were its essence. And even as he lived them, there was always the knowledge, somewhere deep within, that the hour is precious precisely because it is brief. November the 22nd, 1963. A sunny day in Dallas, Texas. A day that began with a breakfast speech, with handshakes, with a laughing Jacqueline in a pink suit and a matching pillbox hat, roses presented to her at the airport. The motorcade wound through cheering crowds, a bright, hopeful tableau. The sky was clear, a perfect blue. Kennedy sat in the back of the open limousine, waving, his wife beside him, the governor of Texas and his wife in front. They turned onto Elm Street, past the Texas School Book Depository. And then, in an instant, the light was seized by darkness. Shots rang out. The world stopped. I will not dwell on the pain of that day, my darling. This is a story meant to bring you peace, not sorrow. But I must tell you that every finest hour we have recounted was sealed in that final sacrifice. He gave all of himself, his body already racked with Addison's disease and back pain, his mind ever whirring, for the cause of a better world. And when the bullet struck, he fell into history, into legend, into the hearts of millions who would never forget where they were when they heard the news. Church bells tolled around the globe. In cities from Paris to Nairobi, strangers wept in the streets. The world grieved as if it had lost a member of its own family. He was 46 years old, but, my sweet one, listen to me, the story does not end there. It does not end with the flag-draped casket, the riderless horse with the boots reversed in the stirrups, the eternal flame flickering at Arlington Cemetery over his grave. It does not end with little John, 3 years old, saluting his father's passing coffin on that sorrowful Washington morning, an image that broke the world heart. No, that was not the end. His spirit, the spirit of his finest hours, lives on. It lives in the Peace Corps volunteer teaching a child to read. It lives in the diplomat who chooses negotiation over bombing. It lives in the civil rights marcher who links arms and sings, "We shall overcome." It lives in the astronaut who looks back at Earth from the blackness of space and sees a blue marble without borders. It lives in every person who chooses peace over war, justice over prejudice, hope over fear, service over self. Now, my darling, as the night grows deeper and the moon climbs higher, let us gather all these moments into one single, shining truth. John Fitzgerald Kennedy's finest hour was not one event. It was the way he lived every hour. It was courage when others wanted war. It was kindness when others wanted anger. It was justice when others wanted indifference. It was hope when others wanted fear. It was love when others wanted division. He did not live a long life, but in his short time, he packed a lifetime of glory. He taught us that strength is not loud, strength is steady. He taught us that wisdom is not knowing all the answers. Wisdom is listening, caring, choosing carefully. He taught us that freedom is not something we take. It is something we give, protect, and share. He taught us that one person can make a difference, and everyone should try. Close your eyes again, my darling. Let your body sink into the softness of your bed. Feel the gentle weight of the blankets, the coolness of the pillow. The moon still hangs low outside your window, a silent, silvery guardian. The world is soft and still. The leaves outside rustle like a whispered lullaby. The distant hum of the night is the sound of peace, the very peace that brave souls have fought to preserve. You are safe. You are loved. You are part of that long chain of hope that stretches from the past into a future you will help to shape. Hold close to your heart the finest hour of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the hour he chose peace over war, the hour he chose justice over prejudice, the hour he chose hope over fear, the hour he chose service over self. That hour lives on. It lives in you. You, my precious child, carry that light now. When you are kind to someone who is lonely, you honor him. When you stand up for someone who is being treated unfairly, you honor him. When you choose to solve a conflict with words instead of fists, with understanding instead of anger, you honor him. When you reach for your dreams, even when they seem as far as the moon, you honor him. When you serve your community, your family, your friends, in small, daily acts of love, you honor him. The finest hour is not reserved for presidents and generals. It is available to every heart that chooses goodness. Freedom is a gift, my darling. A gift you hold in your hands. A gift you can give to others every day, by letting them speak, by treating them with dignity, by protecting their right to be themselves. Now the night is gentle. Your eyes are heavy, the lids soft as petals. Your breath is slow and calm, in and out, like waves on a quiet shore. The story is nearly done, but the dream is just beginning. Sleep now, my beloved. Sleep in peace, knowing that brave people have walked this earth before you, facing unimaginable dangers and choosing the light. Sleep knowing that light always outlasts darkness. Always, always, always. Sleep knowing that you are capable of your own finest hour, perhaps not on a global stage, but in the life you touch today and tomorrow. Dream of courage. Dream of the steady voice that says, "We choose to do this not because it is easy, but because it is hard." Dream of kindness. Dream of the hand that reaches out to A. Stranger, the arms that hold a frightened child. Dream of peace. Dream of a world where walls fall, where missiles are dismantled, where children of every color play together in the sunlight. Dream of your own small, glorious moments, moments that make the world softer, brighter, and more free, and as you drift into the gentle country of sleep, carry with you the memory of a man who stood tall in the cold, who walked calmly through crisis, who looked at the moon and saw a frontier, who looked at a wall and saw a future without walls, who looked at injustice and called it by name, who loved his children and his wife with a tender heart. Let that memory be a lullaby. Let it sing you down into deep and restful sleep, where no shadows can follow. Good night, my darling. Good night, my heart. May your sleep be filled with the finest hours yet to come. May you wake with the sun and carry into the new day a little spark of that eternal flame, the flame of hope, of service, of love. Rest now. Rest and freedom is a gift, my darling. It is yours. Pass it on.